Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to Emma's Manager Meetup Career Insights with Sumit Bothra. It's lovely to see so many familiar and new faces here today. My name is Michelle Ronquillo, and I am Emma's Event Manager. Just a little bit about us for those who are new. Within Emma, we bring together music managers organizations from 18 European countries representing over 3,000 managers across Europe. Our mission is to strengthen European music managers globally, and we do this through Empower 2.0, or flagship program, encompassing education, advocacy, networking, research, and international collaboration. Empower 2.0 is co-founded by the European Union and focused on building a fairer, greener, more inclusive and digitally resilient music ecosystem. If you'd like to learn more about Empower 2.0, I'm going to drop the links in the chat to our website, and you can explore it at any time. Our website is emma.community/empower with two M's. And to stay connected with us, make sure to visit our website, follow us on social media, join our WhatsApp community, and sign up to our newsletter. At the end of the session, when you log off Zoom, a very short survey will pop up. We'd really appreciate if you could take a moment to fill it out. Your feedback genuinely helps us improve and shape future events. Today's career, it's going to be a masterclass. So yes, today's masterclass is moderated by Emma's Executive Director, Jess Patridge. And also, please remember, this is your time. So please ask the questions in the chat. And yeah, I think that's all from me. Let's dive in. Jess, over to you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Really, really appreciate it. And welcome, everyone. I'm really excited for this session. Sumit, you're such an inspiring person, and I really, really hope that so many people here can find out what they want, ask the questions that they want, and really get to the knowledge of your experience. So just to say before we start, everyone, please do ask questions. You can put your hand up. I am very happy for you to butt in, take over my role. You know, we don't need me. You will see me way too much. So please feel free to do it and ask your questions. If you don't feel comfortable talking, it's okay. You can just ask in the chat and we'll make sure that they're asked. But also, you know, let's make this an interactive session if we can. We really appreciate you being here, and we want you to get the knowledge that you're looking for out of these sessions. So with that, and without further ado, Sumit, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
I think it would be great if you can just, to begin with, introduce yourself and give us a quick overview of your career so that, you know, people have a basis for asking questions.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jess, for having me, and thanks to everyone at Emma. It's amazing in the comments to see where people are from. Isn't that just amazing? Wow. Yeah, really honored to be here. Thank you. Quick overview of my career. I'm an artist manager. I'm 49 years old now. I started as a manager when I was about 22, I guess. And I I kind of grew up loving music, never thought I'd ever get to work in music, as is usually the case with most people. Studied finance and engineering, started working for a record label for Virgin Records when I was at university, just plugging bands at events that I was throwing. And then was one of the first, in the first wave of young people to be hit with Napster and LimeWire and peer-to-peer and basically, internet technology that was driving file sharing. This is all before MySpace and iTunes and Spotify and all that kind of stuff. I wrote my dissertation on how I thought that would affect the record business. That's how I met the CEO of Sony Music UK, Paul Berger. Yeah, man changed my life, hired me, moved me to London out of Philadelphia, and then I started working for Sony for 3 years before becoming a manager, and I've been a manager ever since. And over that time, I was an independent manager to begin with, had a roster of about 4 or 5 artists, did pretty well. Then ended up at a company called ATC Management. I was there for 15 years and eventually became the managing director of the European headquarters of that business, and then oversaw about 14 or so managers and support staff in that building. Um, I've managed artists across pretty much most genres over the years. So I've always had very diverse musical tastes, and that's reflected in the type of artists that I work with, and that alongside recording artists, producers, and songwriters on occasion as well. And 2 years ago, I decided to stop my partnership at ATC and go back to being an independent manager, mainly in an effort to just regain some balance, my work-life balance. I'm also a dad to three daughters, and life was kind of happening as well. And it's very important to me that I recognize that and make the appropriate changes. So anyway, I now run my own independent company called SB3. I co-manage PJ Harvey with my old business partner Brian Message at ATC. I
Mhm.
manage Katie Melua. I manage a band called the Boxer Rebellion, and I manage a singer and writer called Nathan Nicholson. And that's me, basically.
I mean, it- it's an incredible story, but also not in some way, if you know what I mean. Like it feels incredible, but it is a slowly building, developing career that has had it makes sense. It's been step by step in some kind of way. Has it felt that way to you?
Um, yeah, I guess so. I mean, I think what really helped for me was my first jobs were on the label side. So when I was at university studying finance and engineering, as I said before, I was working for Virgin Records of America,
Hmm.
which gave me an insight into just plugging records. And I wasn't thinking very analytically about it at the time. I was just having a great time listening to loads of music and handing out free CDs to people. But it did give me an understanding of, how the frontline promotions part of a label works. And then my first job out of uni was at a record label, and then I worked across all of the labels at Sony
Hmm.
before becoming a manager. And I think that um, I think that grounding has really helped me as a manager. And then going kind of step by step. But I was never really trying to, I didn't have a goal. Even when I was at Sony, I wasn't trying to become the CEO of Sony Music. And when
Yeah.
I started my management company, I wasn't trying to have the biggest house on the hill. And when I was at ATC, I wasn't trying to build, this megalith of a business. I was just kind of always focused on doing what I really enjoy doing as much as possible and taking a lot of pleasure out of watching the people around me grow and then symbiotically kind of growing with them. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And
Yeah. Yeah.
I've always approached my life that way. And that just means that you can continue to find joy in the work that you do for as long as possible.
Absolutely. And what do you think that obviously that you talk about that label experience, like informing your future career and understanding those plugging opportunities and how that all worked. What did it really teach you about moving the needle, about what was impactful for artists that you then took into your management?
Well, the first thing it taught me was how to navigate a major label. It's
Hmm.
not the same, which I've learned subsequently when I started working with a lot of independent labels. It's not at all the same, to navigate a major domestically and then navigate that major label internationally. It takes a great deal of skill to
Yeah.
do that effectively on behalf of your artists. Um, and I think that was probably one of the big lessons I took away. The other thing was I was in a really lucky position at Sony because I kind of was made my own department there, which was doing promotions for newly signed artists. And I got to work across all of the labels, which is very rare. So I
Okay.
worked
Yeah.
for Epic, for Sony, for jazz, for classical, for compilations, for S2, the domestic label, um, working across all of the genres, including their third-party labels like Independiente and Creation, as well as some of the American labels. So I got a really well-rounded education there. And I never complained about my terrible salary because I was getting paid to learn from my point of view, and it was an amazing learning. I think it's quite different now because back then in those labels, all of the component parts that you needed to sign an artist and break an artist on a global level were all in that building. You
Yeah.
hardly ever used outside agencies or pluggers, etc. That became quite a new phenomenon, really, where the majors were starting to use outside pluggers. And that was
Sure.
mainly because those executives were at the majors and then they jumped ship
They left and then they
and
would,
made
yeah.
their own businesses and then started, attracting that business. But while I was there across all of those labels, pretty much all of the skill set that you needed to get all the way through from signing to record 5, 6, 7 was all under one roof. It's very different now, as I'm sure many people here can attest to that have walked into the major labels in their countries, that it's just a very different beast.
Um, I'm intrigued when you say about working with independents and majors. We do, I think intrinsically we know that they're different, but what have been the like most surprising or most interesting things about how they work differently and how you approach working with them differently?
Well, the first thing is that there's a there seems to be more retention of people in an independent label than there would necessarily be at a major.
Yeah,
So at a major, you kind of have to navigate that major to get what you need when you need it from the person you need it while you can. Because it's very hard to rely on any degree of permanence. It's like the person
yeah,
that signed you could be gone in 6 weeks. Your pluggers, sometimes your entire label staff can be gone in 6 weeks, right? So you kind of need to bed into that system to help you weather those storms. When you're working with independents, generally speaking, there will always be a handful of people at that label, if not the majority of people at that label, that have been there for quite a long time. And that does give you and the artist some degree of assurance that, you're in a stable household.
yeah,
And just understanding your environment has a natural impact on the way in which you relate to people in that organization.
yeah,
Do you
of
see what I
course.
mean? It's
Yeah,
like if you're in a youth hostel and you're there for a week and you interact with a few people and you get to know them and you make a few fast friends and everyone else is whatever, it's all very transient versus going into a different type of residence for a 2 week stint with, or like a retreat of two
yeah,
weeks with like 20 people, and you just form a different language and a different rhythm and a different way of working and understanding each other. Um, so I would say that just the way you interact with people changes
yeah.
dramatically.
That's such an interesting takeaway and not necessarily what I expected at all. I was expecting, oh, well, budgets are really different or, all of those things. But no, the way you relate to the people is such a core part of the way you do business. So it's really,
Yeah,
really
I think I
interesting.
think though I mean you raise a good point, Jess, though on the money and when it comes to accessing resource, you
Hmm.
have a great idea, or you know that your band is, maybe you're signed in Germany, but something is happening in Canada, for
Hmm.
example. And so as a manager, you're identifying that, okay, we have our domestic market, but there's a promoter over there, or there's a radio station there, and there's a fire burning there, and you want to start feeding those markets, which is the intelligent thing to do. One of the things that is more challenging within a major is there's a lot more red tape. There's a lot more protocols. You're not just talking to one body, and saying,
Yeah,
hey, this is what I think will be good for us. Can you help fund that trip and that trip and that trip? In the majors, it doesn't work that way. So the resource is there, but learning how to access that resource at the right time is more challenging, I think, for inexperienced managers, and that can deliver a lot of frustration. It can deliver a lot of frustration for the artists as well. It's
yeah,
like it's popping off in the States, and why can't we all go there and do this TV show or do this tour or whatever? Because the label says no. And the label will have a variety of reasons to why that doesn't make sense. But when you're within an indie, I just think it's just a more holistic approach to how you work. And so you,
and I
you
guess
might have,
more flexible, more reactive to
yeah,
what's
maybe.
happening.
And then you might have a smaller amount of resource, but then I think you have a greater transparency of like, look, this is how much we have to play with. So if
Yeah,
you really want to take this money and go to the States, fine, but just know that only
that's going to
allows us
come.
this. And so it maybe helps you to think about things slightly differently and think about things from a business perspective more than from a purely, you know, creative and expressionist perspective. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And all through this journey of your career, and we'll move on to like more specifics in a minute, but where have been the biggest turning points? Where have been the moments that you've been like, ah, things have changed for me at this point? Um, was it, coming to London? Was it signing a certain band or like working with a certain band and being like, okay, this is
I
different
had
now?
no, it's never really been about working with a certain band because, I've had those moments, not just about myself, but just collectively. So if I start working with a band, right from the beginning, and you kind of grind it out for 2, 3, 4, 5 years and two records or three records, and it's exhausting work, and you're the TM, you're the merch person, you're the accountant, you're doing all of this stuff. And then at one point you're on a festival stage playing to 20,000 people or 5,000 people, you know what
Mm,
I mean? And you feel that turning point that something's changed. Um, and that can happen in a variety of different ways. It could be you land an amazing TV performance, or you get your first playlist on the radio. There's so many touch points that it's all relative, right? That
yeah,
where you were and where you are, something has changed, and you can now sell out a whole tour. And before then, you were worried about being able to sell a room out. So I've had many, many of those experiences. I think the first time I realized that I wielded some degree of power was when I was 25, I think, and I was managing a producer, composer, DJ, who was very well established. And I landed him a video game score with Sony PlayStation, and it was for a really big martial arts title. And I negotiated at the time. It was at the time the biggest Sony had ever paid for a composer to score a video game. And it was this artist's first ever score of a video game. And it was £250,000, I think. But I remember going into Sony PlayStation in London for my first meeting with the board, the whole team. And it's quite a big team. So I got
mm,
there a little bit early and I was sitting in the boardroom and there were maybe 15 executives there, because these are big productions.
yeah, yeah, of course.
And so we're all kind of sitting there and we were sat there for, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes, just sitting. And I was wondering who, maybe we're waiting for someone or something. And then someone turns to me and says, do you know when the manager is going to be here so we can get started? Would you mind giving him a call? And I was like, I am the manager. And they were, oh, right. Oh, okay. Wow, you're a lot younger than we thought. Okay, right. Wow. Because before then, I'd only been dealing with them on phone calls and on emails.
Yeah,
And
before Zooms.
yeah, and it was a big deal and it all got signed off and all of that kind of stuff. But I think that for me was probably when I realized that, no one's going to tell me, no one anoints you that you are now a qualified manager.
Manager. No,
Even now there are courses and you can graduate and you can get a degree or diploma and it says, you've qualified in artist management, but you don't feel it until you feel it. Um,
absolutely.
so that moment probably for me was a pretty big one. Um, and then, as I said, there have been others along the way, but they tend to be quite collective experiences for me, though. It's not,
Not
I find it quite
individualistic. Yeah.
lonely if it's just something you feel yourself, It's like if we all kind of feel it together, that feels more powerful to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's a team. It's a team effort. It should be.
Yeah.
Um, just at this point, I want to ask if anyone has any questions to throw to Summit.
Sure. I see Adam Gale went to Penn. Nice. I
Um,
went to Penn as well, Adam.
okay, so we've got two questions. Um, to take on another artist these days, would they have to convince you to start from scratch again? And did you ever work with co-managers for other regions and time zones?
To take on another, oh, it's from Tessie, the legend. To take on another artist these days, what would they have to convince you to start from scratch?
So like a new,
Yeah, good question. I mean, first and foremost, I I would have to really feel the music in my soul because but I've always felt that way. I think even as an inexperienced manager, I can't really work on something that I don't feel emotionally and physically invested in. That then I feel like I'm just doing a job, and I never got into this to do a job. You know what I mean?
yeah.
So that's the first thing. So the music has to convince me. It doesn't even have to convince me. It just has to speak to me, and then I have to convince myself that it's worth fighting for. And then if I meet the artist and we talk and I feel there's a real engagement and we can understand each other and I can speak their language and understand the way they need to communicate with me. I ask a lot of questions, in terms of their tolerance for certain things, what kind of career do they want? Do they want a very independent, localized career? Is that what they're looking for? Or do they want something much grander? If it's something grander, I have to think about resourcing, and whether there's going to be enough bandwidth to be able to achieve what they're hoping to achieve.
Hmm.
Um, those are kind of the key things, really. It's like what kind of, what is in your DNA that I can work with. And I'm also very upfront about the way I like to work and my office hours and the way I kind of structure my work-life balance and how I think it's important for the artist to do that as well. So it doesn't really take much to convince me as such. I don't think I could ever be convinced to manage someone I didn't in my heart feel I wanted to and could manage and do a really decent job at. And
I mean, I have a question later on, which I might just ask
yeah,
now in
yeah,
terms
sure.
of like, what are you, what are you looking for apart from that? Like, are there certain things that should be in place? Are there people that you should have in mind that could be part of the team because they'll like it too? Because obviously you're talking about more of a collective effort. It's not just a manager by themselves often, or it shouldn't be. Are there
I mean,
metrics that are very important and metrics that you're ignoring, you know?
um, well, usually with brand new artists, I mean, what are the metrics? The metrics might
Sure.
be my social media numbers, but that can be a real double-edged sword. If the numbers are really strong, then you've kind of carved a path and and created a community around a certain world. And now I have to believe in whether I can expand that world or not. Do I want to play that game? I don't know if I do necessarily. There
Okay,
is
yeah.
something to be said about starting from a near blank canvas where we can kind of strip it all down and rebuild it as we want it to be built. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I don't care at all about metrics, whether it's a brand new artist or an established artist. It doesn't bother me at all because I know what value I can bring to the
Yeah.
table. So if I see that something areas of this business are underperforming, if it's a established artist, then that I like that. Then I know that there's
You're
places.
like, I can have this impact. I can
Yeah,
see.
I can add value in all of these places, and now our relationship is very symbiotic, and I feel good about the work that I do and how I get compensated for it. So, so yeah, sometimes it's actually harder if all the metrics are totally kicking off, then you one wrong move and you can totally fuck up a career, pardon my French. So
Yeah, yeah.
there's a different type of pressure in that. Do I want that? I don't know if I do. And have I co-managed with people? Um, uh, yes, I have. I've co-managed with people domestically, and I have co-managed internationally. Um, and it's not impossible as long as your roles are quite clearly defined. I think it's a disservice to the artist if an artist is co-managed by two people who haven't figured out how to organize themselves properly.
Yeah.
I think that can cause chaos. And I've
And that's completely unfair on the artist then. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
it's a
can
te
see
it's a
that.
te it's that's the worst. I mean, two managers that don't understand how to actually operate as two effective managers. That's a nightmare scenario, really.
And do you think upcoming with AI, the brand
Yeah.
of artists will be more important than the music, or what will it be in the future? As we already saw influencers become singers. So are
I
we
don't, I'm not sure
the
if I,
important I think it's more of a question of like the importance of the brand of an artist, because the music can be emulated and people are making AI tracks and everything like that. So the actual brand, the actual vision of the artist, the way they look, the way that they are, all of those things are could be more important than the music itself. Could be.
uh, sure, it could be, but that's all right.
Not for you, maybe.
It might not be for me, but that's okay. I'm a big proponent of to each their own. If you do that and you find success in it and you've got an audience and you can feed your family, then go for it.
Absolutely. Um, we talk a lot about sustainable development and what that means with artists and everything like that. For you, what does that look like, and what's non-negotiable in the foundation of an artist? Like, do they have to be able to, they have a good story? Do they have to, obviously the music, but the community consistency in the way they work, the way that they are there any things that um really, when you're thinking, okay, I want to build this in a sustainable way that makes sense, what are the things that you're looking for?
Prioritizing relationships over commerce.
That's a great and very straightforward answer. Do you want to expand on it at all in terms of what that might look like or has looked like in your experience?
I mean, it's very straightforward, really. I think the world's a small place. Everyone is interconnected. It doesn't cost to be kind and courteous, even if you disagree with somebody. You can always choose not to work with people that you don't share values with. But I think if you want a healthy, sustainable business, you're building a business, right, as a manager
Yeah.
on behalf of a client or in partnership with an artist. Um, Relationships really matter, and nourishing good relationships really matter. I can't tell you just how many times, you know, I've bumped into people years later, 20 years later, randomly at a label or at a conference or on a Zoom, whatever, you just bump into these people and there's nothing better than having a fond recollection of that person in
Yeah.
the moment in time and you remember the moment in time or maybe you might even struggle, but then eventually you're just like, oh my God, yeah, totally. And you realize and you remember that we were very courteous to each other back then. It's nice. And it's nice to see you again. And then you can have a little catch up and then all of a sudden you're working on something together because you've kind of both moved along in your life to a different place. And that's amazing. And the longer you're in this business, the more you value that, later on in life. And so if I start working with a new artist now, I'm drawing on 25 plus years worth of strong global relationships with people.
It's really kind of reflective of what you were saying about the independent artists, the independent record labels as well. Like having that person or people there that know their surroundings, understand their business, and can be you have the faith in them. You know that they are going to be there. You know what they're like. You can approach them in a way that makes sense to you. So it's kind of
Mm.
similar that in that way that the relationship is central. Um,
Totally central. It's in our game. And I see people, you know, violently disrespect that idea and that principle. And I think it's just a tragedy. I think it's a real tragedy when I see it in managers who maybe I'm having to negotiate with a manager or deal with a manager because their artist has collaborated with one of mine or something like that. And the way in which they approach the conversation with me or the way in which they approach the beginnings of a relationship it tells me an awful lot about the way that they conduct themselves in business. And we can decide very easily that that isn't the type of person that I want to work with.
Yeah.
But oftentimes, and I've never done this, but there have been times where I've wanted to call up the artist that was being
And be like, by
represented
the way,
and be like, by the way, your manager sucks, and your manager is going to drive your career into the ground because of X, Y, and Z. And
I feel like a lot of managers in this room will have this
it's
understanding and
it's
experience in some
it's the
way.
worst. It's just the worst. It's just like, why? What are you doing? So relationships, anyway, to answer your question.
We have a few very practical questions and my own to begin with.
Sure.
But can I ask you what practical things like tools, whatever, do you implement to align the core team? Because obviously it can be so difficult to communicate with the agent, with the label, with
Yeah.
the publisher, everything
Sure.
like that. And the artists themselves. I mean, don't there's a whole other world of communication there, but like are there specific tools that you use that you find effective to manage that?
Yeah. Yeah. I tell you which tool I find the most effective is my phone, picking it up and calling someone. Because the amount of people that just become keyboard warriors all day long, and it's just like firing off emails and emails and emails and emails and just to get things done. And I'm just like, just pick up the phone. Why are you bombarding me with all this stuff? Just pick up the phone and we'll talk for 30 seconds and we'll nail it and it's done. And I think in terms of tools, that's the number one tool at my disposal that is just easy. I'm always like, hey, jump on a call with me. Let's iron it out. Let's figure it out.
Do you tend to implement like regular calls or anything like that in order to also like do you have a
Yeah.
cadence or anything like that that
With 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 my team, I try to. It's challenging sometimes. I'm
of course.
definitely one of those guys who's like, right, every Tuesday at 11 o'clock, we're gonna get on a call and we're gonna go through X, Y, and Z. And then it's hard in our game because things happen and out of your control, and then all of a sudden you have to shift gears. But I think as long as everyone understands that, then that's okay. So
Yeah.
no one holds me to it. But and with my artists, it really depends on how they like to communicate with me. Like with Nathan and I, Nathan's he's the lead singer from the Boxer Rebellion, but I manage him as a solo artist and a songwriter. He's extremely prolific, so he's sending me songs all the time, and there's so much going on with him. And we don't really schedule calls. He'll just call me on the fly to talk through things. I'll call him on the fly, but we do it so regularly that if a few days go by and we haven't spoken, that's just weird. You
Okay,
know what
yeah.
I mean? And we both feel it is a little bit weird, and he might send
Like,
me a
okay, we
text
need
being
to
like,
do
"Yo, dude, let's get on a call." I'm like, "Okay, cool." And then we may have no work to talk about, but it's a regularity to keep in contact. Um, with Katie Melua, because I think also it depends on what state they're in. If an artist is on tour, they may
yeah, or
want a different type of
releasing or
contact
yeah.
with me. If an artist is writing, they may want to be left totally alone. If we're in between campaigns and we're in ideation, then maybe we have more regular meetings. So like with Katie right now, she's writing her 10th album. And, as she went into that journey, I was like, listen, when it comes to communication, how do you want us to communicate with you? What works for you to keep your mind focused on your family and your work? And
Yeah.
she's like, every Friday, 11 o'clock, let's jump on a Zoom and cut through some stuff. And outside of that, if it's super urgent, I'll just text her and we'll have a chat about it. So,
Yeah.
um, but outside of that, when at ATC, we kind of tried Slack. It worked for a while and then it didn't. We tried Monday to stay on top of priorities. It worked for a while. It didn't. So I don't have any hard and fast rules about it. I just think I use a whole variety of different tools for different artists. So I have to be quite technologically adept to be able to do that because they all like to use different things.
Yeah. Different
So
things work for different people and brains,
yeah,
so it totally
totally.
makes sense.
Yeah,
Actually, on the Katie thing, we have another question here about how big is the team around Katie Melua and, an artist her size,
yeah.
what does the team look like?
Well, the management team is small. It's three people.
Hmm.
So it's me. It's a day to day. And my colleague Jan, who oversees the business management side of things. So and Katie and I are very much at the center of at the center, so we kind of we kind of manage each other in a way. Um, I much prefer smaller teams. I have at one point when I was at ATC, I had a team of 6 or 7 assistants, I think, slash day-to-days. And I probably spent more time managing that team of people than I did managing myself and my artists. So
Yeah.
I don't really do that anymore. I keep my teams really, really small. And then, you bring in what you need in terms of the expansive team. Like if you add up the amount of people in Katie Melua's business, it's well over 100 people around the world between labels and publishers and A&Rs and promoters and obviously like with most artists, um, but in terms of core team, it's really, really small, you know.
Very interesting. And yeah, the juxtaposition of those three people managing, I guess, kind of the relationship with that 100 people.
Yeah.
That's a lot to think about as well in terms of division of labor and things.
Mm.
Um, we have another question here. Three skills nowadays managers should fulfill, in your opinion.
What was that? 3 skills.
Yeah, the three essential skills that managers should have. I think communication is very clearly one of them in terms of what you've been saying already. That relationship building skill is very important, maybe.
I would say listening
Yeah.
is really important. I think you lose a lot of information when you open your mouth too much. And I see that a lot too. And so I see managers and artists communicating with each other, and I'm just like, you're not even actually listening. You know what I mean? I think you have to listen. Um, so that's one thing. And that's really important because the clearer that you're able to listen, and not just to your artists, right, but also to all of those other people in that ecosystem, um, and to yourself, the clearer you listen, the deeper your understanding, and the deeper your understanding, the more fluid and succinct your communication.
Hmm.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, and that just makes you more effective.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing. I think being kind to yourself is another one. Managers that it's a tough job. Like it's a great job and it's amazing when you get the wins and everything else. But I think as a manager, you are so um you're so squeezed in,
Yeah.
almost suffocatingly so every day, and you have almost too much just riding on this one little pin that must not fail, you know? Because if it does, this whole world comes crashing down, and then you times that by one artist, two artists, three artists, four artists, five artists, etc. You can I think you can hold so much responsibility. And I'm guilty of this too, that I have to really check in with myself when I'm feeling overwhelmed. And it may be I'm overwhelmed about this. I may be overwhelmed because I woke up thinking about a shipment of t-shirts that needs to arrive in Holland on Friday that's stuck in customs. I mean, it could be anything.
Oh, 100% understand
It
this.
could
Yeah.
be anything. And so you have that one thing, but then you have that other thing, and you have that other thing, and then there's something happening at home that you needed to do, or someone's not well. And there's a lot to process as a manager of other people.
Yeah.
And we all manage other people in our personal lives. But when you manage other people in your professional life as well, that's more than double the workload. So I think being kind to yourself is really, really important. When I hear managers boasting about, oh, I've slept like 3 hours last night and I slept 2 hours the night before, and then I was out till three and I was da 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 da, and I'm always on, I'm always on, I'm always on. And I'm just like, what are you doing? That's not, if I was the artist, I wouldn't want my manager to be doing that
No,
because
you,
you're putting
yeah,
yourself under too much. So I think active listening and everything that comes with that is really important. I think being kind to yourself and being able to forgive yourself and to know when it's important for you to take a break and recharge, or even when it's important for you to escape an artist management relationship that
Someone.
you know is not good for your health. You have to really listen to yourself and do what's right for you. And then the third thing, I don't know. I don't know if I have a third
It's
thing.
okay. We can start with two and focus on the
Yeah,
next
maybe
question. I'm
those two.
sure that Nuria will be happy with that. If you, so the next one is specific. If you had £15,000 to invest in a brand new independent singer-songwriter in a European country who doesn't yet have radio quality songs or any social media presence, how would you spend that £15,000?
And I have to spend it.
I mean, you have to spend some of it. Where would you be putting money in? Where would you invest?
I'd probably say let's all go to Vegas and put it on black on the roulette table and see what happens.
Not recordings, not focusing on the recordings first.
Yeah, I would just say let's just do that because then at least you're gonna have an amazing experience with 15 grand. That's what I'd do. I don't know. It's a strange question, isn't it? It's like, well, if you had
It
15
depends on the
grand, what
artist, I
would you
guess.
do? Um, I really don't know the answer to that question, I'm afraid. I don't have all the answers. I should make made that clear at the beginning.
Of course. What would be your first steps if your band has great feedback in Mexico? They're an independent band from Europe in a jazzy experimental niche. Where would you go? How can you start when you go from how can you start when you start from knowing nobody in Mexico? They're
Okay.
getting good
So,
feedback over there, but you
so
don't
good
know
feedback
anyone there.
from fans, I'm assuming.
I would guess so, yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, the first thing I would do is if my band had an agent, I would get a hold of my agent and say, there's something brewing in Mexico. Can you hit up promoters in Mexico and pitch them my band and let them know that something's happening on the ground over there? That's the first
Mm.
thing I'd do.
So
And
live,
see if
you'd
there was
focus straight away on live,
I would
essentially.
100%, 100%. I would focus on live, yeah. And the reason I'd say that is because I think if I'm by the nature of description, I'm assuming this is a live performing band, right?
Yeah.
So and they tour. So I would say find someone in Mexico that's willing to book you and bring you down. And the reason that isn't as crazy as an idea as it sounds, because the first thing that'll run through your mind is, well, how on earth do we get the cash to be able to do that in the first place? What you
Mm.
need to know is that Mexico, like many such markets, a lot of their live industry, on the smaller side as well as the bigger side, and including clubs, a lot of it is brand funded, right?
Okay.
So, and it was the same in India, and it's still to a degree is the same in India and other parts of the world where the brands subsidize a lot of the arts, and that allows bookers to be able to bring international artists in to tour. And that's even like doing, a run of, let's say, 3 or 4 headline shows across Mexico, which you can do. There's an amazing infrastructure there. There's amazing music community there. Awesome promoters. I know a bunch of them. I've been there many times. So it's just like find a promoter that believes in your band. If your band is playing South by Southwest, you'll meet a lot of Mexican industry are there. Uh,
Hmm.
so if they are at South by, that's also a good thing. Is like use that as an opportunity to find when everyone's clambering over finding a US agent and US promoters and US publicists, etc., maybe start thinking about who else is there and
Mexico,
pay
yeah.
attention to them. And if opening up Central and Latin America is important to you, um, then I would say you open up Mexico, and that's your North American gateway, and, which may or may not allow you to go into the States, but it doesn't really matter. You open up Mexico, and then all of a sudden you can move yourself down through the ranks because those promoters are also very, very interconnected.
Yeah.
So I think you'll find there's an amazingly organized network of people there. But in order
Just
to prove what you're worth, you need to get into market and play a show.
just on that, I mean, you're talking about developing a network. So it's like, okay, I see an opportunity here. I need to develop my network a bit in Mexico. I need to start reaching out to people, maybe attend South by Southwest and find the right promoters or if I'm there, what tools do you use most for building that network? If you see an opportunity, what would you head to? Would you use
LinkedIn's pretty
tools?
good.
LinkedIn? I was going to
Yeah.
say, would you use tools like LinkedIn? But yeah,
Yeah.
you do. Yeah.
Yeah, we do. Yeah. I mean, we also just you start hitting up people in your network. I mean, anyone that's here is connected to Emma. Emma is connected to everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody. Yeah, everyone is reachable, right? So
Yeah.
if you're already part of a professional organization like Emma and you want to reach to people in Mexico, all you need to do is put the word out into into the Emma mainframe and someone will know someone and make a few calls because we're all part of it to be able to help each other. So you're
Yeah.
probably not as far removed from those people as you think you are when you
Yeah.
start. And but LinkedIn is also great. The more connected you are on that platform, you can look at someone, you can see who they're connected to. There's someone that you know. Hopefully that person's friendly to you and will make an introduction. But we on the occasion where we're trying to get to people, usually in other industries that we aren't immediately connected to, LinkedIn would be my first port of call, really.
Okay. Interesting. That's really good to know. Um, we have one more question here. Um, you mentioned the early stage grind when it's more important, where it's more about belief and potential than reality. How did you manage your artist's sense of self-belief in this phase during their moments of self-doubt?
In so many ways. I think that is, I think some people are built to be able to do that quite effectively without much training.
Mm-hmm.
Mainly quite empathetic people, you know?
Yeah.
And if it's in your nature to be empathetic, I think you're probably more inclined to be able to help artists when they're feeling that way. But also, I think nowadays we are so well resourced, right? With places to go and people to call when artists are in desperate need of help. And if you feel you might not be able to provide that kind of help, especially here in the UK, there's Music Minds Matter and that's helped musicians for as examples, but then plenty others. Um, but I had a conversation with an artist once for 2.5 hours on the phone the night before a really, really, really big launch of a really big event. And it was all sold out. It was all happening. And it was 2.5 hours of conversation and eventually managed to to generate the courage for that artist to be able to step in the room. And ultimately it was just take a step in. And if you turn around and say, I just can't do it, then that's cool. We'll kill it all. It's no problem, you know? But I'll just be right by your side and we'll do it together. And let's step into that room and see what happens and see how you feel because you might feel differently. Um,
Yeah.
because a lot of times, emotionally based decision making is a very dangerous thing. When your emotions are running really high and you have to make decisions, you're not always going to make the right call at that time.
Yeah.
And we've all been there, and you
Yeah,
sleep on
of course.
something or you go for a walk around the block, you breathe some air, you kind of shake it out, and then you come back to the table as a different person and with a different perspective. So I think my job is always to try, the more I can understand the artist that I'm working with, the more capable I become at understanding how their mind works and giving them the support that they need to be able to unlock whatever it is in their mind that needs unlocking.
I mean, I guess that's kind of true of all close relationships in some way.
Yeah,
You know,
100%.
you get to know
Yeah,
someone, you learn a bit more about how they operate and what actually is helpful to them and what is
yeah,
overwhelming for them and what is, yeah, all of those things.
yeah,
But it does help if you're empathetic.
yeah.
I just want to flag that we only have 10 minutes left. So if anyone does have questions, now make sure you get them in because otherwise you won't get a chance and you don't want to miss this opportunity. So please. In the meantime, I'm going to ask one more question about deals. So
Yeah.
obviously, since you have launched your own business, but also through your career, I'm really interested in how the deals you're making have changed. Like, what types of different deals and partnerships are you pursuing now versus earlier in your career? And what do they look like? Are you noticing anything changing? I mean, more generally in the industry, also when it comes to
Yeah.
deals with majors or anything like that?
Well, I would say collaborative deals are definitely changing, particularly in electronic. I do a lot of work in the electronic space with
Mhm.
Nathan. We've worked with some of the biggest DJs and electronic producers in the world now. And that space, and there are other genres like it, but it's hyper collaborative. You've got a lot of writers and a lot of people involved in the making of records. And what I'm definitely starting to see now is a more equitable way of dividing the pie amongst all of those contributors.
Okay,
And
yeah.
it definitely wasn't like that before. It was very much like we're on the master side, you're on the publishing side. You never kind of reach across the aisle um and take what's not yours. But now it feels like there's definitely more uh yeah, just more of an equitable view. Not with everybody, but with a lot of people, I think. And that makes me feel very happy, particularly for those
That's really nice.
creators who have been quite sidelined in terms of like, look, the streaming pie, it's like 85% of the revenue is on the master side, 15% is on the publishing
Exactly,
side.
yeah.
And it's the writers that are just totally squeezed out on that 15%. And I feel that there's some degree of redress happening there. I think it's more commonplace now, but certainly, 15 or so years ago, it wasn't as common for artists to be able to hold on to their rights.
Hmm.
Um, that is far more common now, where, record deals as well as publishing deals, there is a rights reversion. It's not always the way, but most labels and most publishers will allow rights to revert. You can certainly fight for rights to revert. All of my artists, um, Nathan owns everything he's ever written. Katie owns everything she's ever written. Katie owns every master she's ever recorded. Um, Polly owns every song she's ever written, and the Boxer Rebellion own everything they've ever created. You know,
Okay. Yeah.
so I think those are this is pretty different landscape now and I think that's really important for any manager to try and make sure their artists and their writers hold on to their IP, even
Yeah.
if it comes back, 10, 15 years later, it's your pension, right? So.
That's really, I mean, as a piece of advice, as like a thing to take away, that's a really good, solid, important one, I think.
I should also say, what given we are here as a collective of managers, management deals are changing as well. Like all of my deals have changed. And I think because I've had very, very open, honest, frank conversations with my artists about um, recognizing the value that great management brings to them, not just them as a person. Um,
It's their business.
but to their business and to their brand and their reputation and their credibility and all of those things. And I think there's definitely, and I'm a big advocate for a sea change when it comes to management contracts with artists. I
Can
think
you
managers,
just, you don't have to give specifics, but
yeah.
can you give some insights into those changes? You could just say higher
I
percentages
mean, well,
or
firstly, there are different models now, which I think is great. So there are managers that are actually building businesses with their artists. There are managers that are just on straight retainers, but then they don't have to deal with too much of the frontline stresses, but they can just do a really solid job and
Mhm.
work on a retainer basis. The traditional management agreement of like 20% of net plus, a post term is definitely starting to shift. I think that 20% is going to grow. There was a huge piece of research that the MMF UK um
The
uh
value of managers.
the value that launched what about 5 or 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And the findings of that was a totally independent team of researchers. The findings of that is that managers um a more fair percentage for a manager would actually be closer to 30% than 20%. And when it comes to post-term, my friends that work in the film and TV business that represent actors and actresses and others in that creative field, they don't even have sunset clauses on their deals.
Yeah.
So they find it bizarre. They don't understand how we even survive as artist managers. They're just like, I don't get it. How do you do that? Because you're constantly running out of fuel to build your business. And there's a lot that can be learned from that. And obviously, every manager has to do what's appropriate within their scope and the people that they work with. But I'm a big advocate for fairer deals for managers because I think ultimately that means that the industry will retain very strong managers, and the management community will grow and needs to grow to become more influential and more effective for the artists that we manage. And in turn, that then helps the artist to bring, to build even stronger, more durable careers without having to give up their rights. So it's all one big circle, but I think that's a very important thing to mention.
We have three questions here, and I'm going to do them back to front just because I think that they're that could be effective. So Danish asks, you mentioned local promoters. Do you work with agents or do you prefer to do shows directly with local promoters? I feel many times there is no added value in working with agents unless I have sp and I have less space to promote and get my message through to the other party.
Um, I do work with agents. I did for one client a while ago, try to be the agent and deal with promoters directly, but the more successful that artist became, the more of a drain that was. It's just such a pain. Um, and also, when you're working with promoters, sometimes when you're working with new promoters and you haven't worked with them before, it's murky waters in the promoter game as it is in our game sometimes, right? So it's choppy waters. So I like to work with agents because the agents have vetted those promoters. They know which promoters are best in class at the time in the genre of music that I'm working within. They can help me if there's a problem. They can help me with contracting. They can bring the deposit in to make sure that we have some financial protection. And they can organize an entire tour 20, 30, 40, 50 plus dates across multiples promoters that I wouldn't have the headspace or bandwidth or wherewithal to do, So I'm a fan of that. But equally, you could work with a promoter that has a lot of influence in their region and is able to book you multiple shows, and you need to only go to one promoter. So it depends on the scope of your work. But that's okay too if it's someone that you trust.
Yeah, and I guess it depends on the artist a little bit as well. If it's a new artist where you're not doing tons of shows and
Sure.
you
Yeah.
just want to sort out a couple of shows, it makes sense maybe to go direct with the promoter, especially
Yeah.
if you know them. So, yeah. Carrie asks, boundaries, where do you put yours?
We usually start around, I mean, I wake up quite early, but generally speaking, I like to have office hours. I like to say, we as a collective start at this time
Hmm.
and we end, usually by 6:30,
Hmm.
unless there's a real need to work beyond that. And sometimes there is, but I'll never really demand that of anybody that I'm working with unless they want to. Um, when I was at ATC, my team, we used to do a half day on a Friday because I always felt that the weekend wasn't quite enough for everyone to get fully recovered. Um, because the weekends can be so busy just dealing with home stuff. So you come back to
Yeah.
Monday and you're just tired. So we used to stop at 12 o'clock. Um, and I staff my bands with great people, so I don't get calls in the middle of the night about weird stuff. And also I try to work with people that have a grown-up mentality. It doesn't matter if they're old or young, but that say they have a grown-up, mature mentality and that they know that, we are working together, but I have my life and you have your life. And I encourage them to also have their life. I always make sure they put holidays in the diary, always make sure they go to birthdays or take care of their loved ones when it's needed. All of that kind of stuff is really important because it keeps us all in check.
Absolutely. Well, we're actually out of time already, and it's been an incredible and insightful journey with you today. So thank you so much for sharing and being
Pleasure.
so open and honest with us about your experience.
All good. So many great questions. Wow, what an engaged bunch of people. Good luck
Yes, we
to you
have
all.
an incredible community that really do ask great
Awesome.
questions. And yeah, please, everyone, we have another session with Matt Greer, who manages the Hives, coming up. So please register for that if you enjoyed this. Why wouldn't you come along to the next one? So yeah, thank you so much, Sumit. We
Yeah,
always love
pleasure.
chatting with you. So thank you, and
All
we'll
right.
see you soon.
Thank
All
you.
right. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.